At the time I needed help the most, that was the time that all of those tools were the most inaccessible to me. And so that was a real puzzle. If these are supposed to be breathing exercises and somatic exercises and poses that are supposed to calm me down, but at the time that I'm most revved up and most triggered, that's the time I'm least able to take advantage of them.
This episode is sponsored by TherapyNotes, TherapyNotes.com. Be sure and check them out, and be sure and use the promo code Gordon, Gordon, and you can try them out for 2 months for free. Over 15 years ago, when I started my private practice, I had to learn a lot, and most of it the hard way, and I don't think you need to do the same. Hi, I'm Gordon Brewer, a licensed psychotherapist, and welcome to the Practice of Therapy podcast, part of the PsychCraft network of podcasts. Join me in this journey of discovery as we have conversations with other leaders and professionals in both the mental and allied health fields. Join us as we explore both the business and clinical sides of running a private practice. And welcome to the podcast. This is episode number 398 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. I'm Gordon Brewer. Glad you've joined us, and hope you'll take time to follow us or subscribe to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it. I'm looking forward to you hearing from my guest today. You know, one of the things about this podcast that I've done over the years, we're approaching our 400th episode, and I'm excited about that. And we've got some special things coming up with that. But one of the things that I've kind of incorporated more and more over the last few years is just having more topics around clinical issues, because I know even though this podcast focused mainly on the business side of running a private practice, we also wear our clinical hats. And there are a lot of great resources and just a lot of new cutting edge kind of techniques and things that are coming out in our fields. And so I'm trying to give us at least a smidgen, or if not a lot, of those types of topics so that people can learn from others that are doing specific work. And in this episode, I've got Caitlin Rose joining me, and she's a neuroscientist. And really, we talk a lot about neuroscience. And in particular, in this episode, we talk a lot about trauma capacity, or a person's capacity to be able to do trauma work. And so I just found it fascinating, and I think you will as well. And Caitlin's got a book out, and the title of the book is Rebuilding the Nervous System After Trauma. And it's a practitioner's guide to restoring safety and courage from the bottom up. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about some of those principles in that book, and also it was just a fascinating conversation, just thinking about being able to know where to start with people depending on their types of trauma. So I think you're in for a treat with this episode and just learning some fascinating stuff in neuroscience as well. So stay tuned for that. And also, as I'd like to mention to folks, if you're interested in doing some consulting with me, I do that. And so if you'll go over to practiceoftherapy.com/coaching and consulting, you can find out more about ways to do that with me. And also, you can just go to practiceoftherapy.com and click on the link up there at the top of the page, the button, and that'll get you to the page where you can find out more about all this. So be sure and check that out. And also, before we get to my conversation with Caitlin, I'd love for you to hear more from one of our sponsors of the podcast, TherapyNotes, along with one of the members of the PsychCraft network.
Hi, I'm Whitney Owens. If you don't know me, I am the person behind the Wise Practice podcast, which is part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts. I am so proud to be a part of this network, along with my good friend Gordon Brewer, who's doing such amazing work on helping people on their practice journey. If you haven't discovered the Wise Practice podcast yet, you can find it anywhere you listen to podcasts. I'd love for you to join us as we explore how to grow a faith-based practice that brings you the income you need and the lifestyle you want. Be sure to check out the podcast and other helpful information at whitneyowens.com.
Rachel here with a quick shout out to TherapyNotes, the EHR that Gordon uses and loves for running his group practice. If you've ever been looking for a solid, all-in-one platform to manage your notes, scheduling, billing, and even secure client messaging, this is it. Gordon's been using TherapyNotes for years, and it's honestly made a huge difference in how smooth things run behind the scenes. He's always saying how it saves him time and keeps everything organized, and as a practice owner, that's huge. And get this, they've just rolled out Therapy Fuel, which is an amazing suite of AI tools that help write your notes faster. You can generate progress notes from session summaries or even from transcriptions. You can also create contact notes straight from secure messages and automatically summarize client history forms. Basically, it's like having a little documentation assistant built right in. Plus, TherapyNotes is always adding new features like automated payments, secondary insurance billing, and a growing library of outcome measures. And if you ever get stuck, their customer service is phenomenal. Seriously, you can call or email 24/7 and talk to someone who actually knows what they're doing. So, if you've ever been thinking about switching or just getting started, now's a great time. Head over to therapynotes.com, click Start My Free Trial, and use the promo code GORDON to get 2 months free. All right, back to the show.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome again to the podcast. And I'm happy for you to get to know today Caitlin Rose. Welcome, Caitlin. Glad you're here.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here with you.
Yes. And so we're going to dive into talking about neuroscience and trauma, which I know is a topic that's interesting to most of us that are in the therapy world. But Caitlin, as I start with everyone, why don't you tell folks a little bit more about yourself and how you've landed where you've landed?
Yeah, thank you. Gosh, when I get this question, you always wonder, how far back should I go? I'll start with where I'm at, and then we'll retrace a little bit. So
good.
My company is Build Resilience, and we help therapists to get unstuck, both personally as well as with their clients, by providing a deep foundation of nervous system regulation. And I'm certified as a performance neuroscience certified coach, which is a whole big mouthful, which basically just means, I've really spent a lot of time deeply understanding the neuroscience, the science behind how our brain and nervous system work and how to work with our brain and nervous system instead of fighting it. And I really started on this journey going way back. I began as a yoga teacher and was really immediately interested in bringing yoga to people who might not, aren't the sort of classic type of person you would think would go to a yoga class. So I was working with homeless populations. I was working with veterans who were dealing with trauma. And I found that a lot of sort of what I had learned wasn't totally accessible to people, but I was really interested in the fundamental principles of what was happening what's happening? Like, why do we like yoga? Why do we gravitate towards these different somatic strategies? When they're working, why are they working? And how do we make that more accessible and available to people who maybe don't have an hour and a half to get on a yoga mat? And also when they don't work, why don't they work? And that was just as interesting to me because I did see a lot of interventions just not connecting. And I also saw that in my own life. So I reached a point where I was I have a, intense trauma history and, was dealing with complex PTSD myself, which is a lot of, as many of us, I'm sure a lot of people can, relate to that. A lot of times it's our own history, our own experience that really brings us to the work and makes us kind of like personally and professionally obsessed with untangling some of these more difficult questions. And so I got to a place where I couldn't even really use a lot of the strategies that I was teaching. I was sitting with myself with major panic attacks and anxiety. And in my head, I'm like, okay, sit there, deep breathe, do, all the things I knew that I had in my toolkit. And I found that at the time I needed help the most, that was the time that all of those tools were the most inaccessible to me. And so that was a real puzzle. At first I got really, really frustrated by that and sort of went through all that roller coaster of feelings that since then I've heard from so many clients. Maybe I'm just broken. Maybe I'm just lazy. I'm the only person in the universe who feels this way. And then finally, I think because I had enough of an education to understand some of what might be going on in the nervous system, I got really curious. And I really started to just wonder, well, why is that? That doesn't make sense. If these are supposed to be breathing exercises and somatic exercises and poses that are supposed to calm me down, but at the time that I'm most revved up and most triggered, that's the time I'm least able to take advantage of them. That seems odd.
Right.
There must be what's going on there. And so that was kind of the beginning of this very long, 10 or 15 year journey now. And coming out the other side and really, having a coherent explanation that I can offer to clients.
Right. I know there was in some of the stuff that you gave to me when in preparing for this episode, and there was a topic that you had mentioned, which I think this might be a good segue for you to say more about, because it's gotten me really curious as well, is the difference between nervous system regulation and nervous system capacity. And I thought that is just, I just think about people that have experienced trauma, especially extreme trauma. They feel overwhelmed all the time. And so, I'm just curious about that as far as the capacity. And so, so tell us what you've learned.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought that up. That's a great, really just picks up exactly like where I was saying, there's a puzzle here. And what is that puzzle? Why is it not connecting? And it is in the difference between nervous system regulation and nervous system capacity. So, I've been doing this 10 or 15 years. In that, when I started, a lot of these topics were still pretty niche. And I think in that time, more and more, there's been, I see, topics about vagal, the vagus nerve exercises, polyvagal theory, nervous system regulation. It's starting to kind of filter into the popular consciousness and more into the world of therapy. And so there's, an instinct of like, okay, we're starting to figure out that nervous system regulation is really important as a foundation for mental and emotional well-being, that we need to, we need to get grounded, we need to get resourced, we need to pay attention to what's going on in our nervous system and, how our heart, what's going on with our heart rate, what's going on with our breathing. That's all really a really, really good awareness. But where it falls apart is sometimes we're focused on, we're like, oh, I have all these tools and I need to help this person get regulated, or I need to help myself get regulated. But if we're not aware of what our actual capacity is, then we can be applying a tool that isn't really accessible and it doesn't actually achieve the result. So that was what was happening with me, is I had all these tools where I was like, oh, deep breathing is a regulating thing. So if I'm freaked out and panicking, I should do that. And it wasn't regulating to me at all, because I wasn't really appreciating my personal nervous system capacity. So, nervous system regulation is the act of getting within our, let's say, our window of tolerance, right? So if our window of tolerance, we can define that as, this is the ability of my nervous system. How much energy and information can my nervous system tolerate right now, right? It can tolerate a lot, it can tolerate a little. the act of getting regulated is getting within my window of tolerance. But
Right.
that's going to look very different if my capacity is here or my capacity is here. It's really difficult to get regulated within a very narrow window. And that's where a lot of the struggle comes, is we're trying to get regulated where we might be better served first expanding that window.
Wow.
And then working on getting regulated within that. And there's so much kind of grief that happens in that struggle to get regulated. And rather than just appreciating, well, yeah, what's the window and how do we grow that window? And that's been the biggest gap that we've sought to fill, is just tackling that question. How do you build your window of tolerance so that it becomes easier and easier?
Yes. So now I'm really curious. What are the ways in which you build that window of tolerance?
Yeah. So there's a couple ways to approach this. And one is just like purely physiologically. And I do want to talk about that because I think those nuts and bolts are really important. The other is just sort of some general principles of understanding how to collaborate with the nervous system. So in general, you want to make sure you're meeting the nervous system where it's at. This is a big kind of just principle that I try to hew to and really pass off to the practitioners that I work with. We're not smarter than the nervous system. We're not stronger than the nervous system. The nervous system is the system that we have it's an exquisitely fine-tuned machine for managing our energy, our emotions, our experiences. And if it's doing something, it's doing it for a good reason. So very often, lacking a real fundamental understanding of what it's doing and why, often we end up sort of in this pitched battle with the nervous system, expecting it, like open up or, give me the capacity to reflect or, or something or feel. And if it's not doing that, then there's always a good reason. And so it's really about entering into a collaborative relationship and taking it on ourselves to really understand the mechanics of how this exquisitely fine-tuned machine was built and how it's meant to operate and what it's doing. So meeting it where it's at, first of all, is how we got to go in to go out, right? Really get curious about, okay, so like, for example, I'm going to share a quick story. When I first sort of figured out this as a working paradigm and I got curious about my own window of tolerance, I had an expectation that my tolerance was probably pretty broad because I'd been doing this work. I was a yoga teacher. I knew all these things. I'd been, I was very educated about this stuff. So I sort of had just this unconscious assumption, I'm sure it's quite broad. And I went into this exercise around just being very honest about what I could tolerate in the moment without distancing or dissociating myself. And as soon as I engaged, it was a somatic exercise. As soon as I engaged with it, I noticed myself just take off, just check out mentally. And it was such a sudden, it was like just this abrupt, wake up call, and really frustrating on some levels because I had to really face up to how narrow that band was that I was working with, but also then deeply, really satisfying to realize, I can work from here. I kept trying to work from out here and nothing was really connecting because I wasn't able to really be honest about what was happening in my nervous system. But as soon as I could get honest, it was confronting, but then I really started to see actual change happen because I was meeting my nervous system where it was at. So that's just getting at some of the kind of the way of orienting to this. But the real nuts and bolts of it, I really got deeply into the neurophysiology of nervous system capacity during COVID, actually, because I had a lot of, this wave of clients coming to me. I'd moved online. Previously, I'd been all offline group workshops. I was teaching, doing workshops at colleges and all that stopped. And then everything was online. And I had this wave of people coming to me in this acute state of panic and anxiety. And I was hitting a lot of these same questions that I'd had for years. I'm not in the room with them. I'm trying to figure out how to reach them. They're just in this spiral. How do I get through? And we really, I went back to my basics and I just started doing as many assessments as I could. And I had a lot of people coming in, so I had a really pretty broad data set. And I started doing this assessment of, mental and emotional symptoms, but then also their physiology. What was going on with their breathing? What was going on with their blood chemistry? And giving them simple at-home tests that they could do. And what I started to see, this pattern, was their vagal tone was really low. Their CO2 tolerance, their tolerance for carbon dioxide in their bloodstream was really low. And their vascular, vascular flexibility was really low, meaning they're just chronically tense. So they're, and chronically holding this chronic tension in their veins and arteries. And so we just started to work directly with those capacities. So, we did a little bit of psychoeducation to give them a little bit of context and some reason to invest their time and energy in this. And then we just started working with exercises to strengthen vagal tone, increase CO2 tolerance, and increase vascular flexibility. Technically, it's called vascular compliance. And it was, the transformations were profound. It really kind of blew me away. I mean, I knew all this stuff worked, but just being really disciplined about just doing that and seeing how many other things just cleared up was pretty incredible and has really laid the foundation for all the work that I do until today.
Yeah. So with those three things, what would be, what's the modality for working with those things? Yeah.
So there's a lot of different ways you can come at it. And again, deciding on the particular intervention is going to go back to that basic principle of understanding where their nervous system is at. So this is where I lean, because different strategies are going to be more or less activating. And so the trick is to find an intervention that, that gives them the most leverage in terms of, really gives them a chance to intervene and shift something in their physiology while still being tolerable in terms of how activating it is to their nervous system. So this is where I really lean on polyvagal theory and, Stephen Porges's the model of the ladder of engagement, of understanding. I don't know how, this is sort of gaining traction, but I never want to assume that people have a familiarity.
Right. Yeah. I think there'll be people that are very familiar with it, and then we'll want to know more. It really, the ladder of engagement is basically just describing the stages of our stress response. And, it's a hierarchical model. And so it's understanding, at the top, when we're at the top of the ladder, we're in a mode of our stress response that's fundamentally social. Sometimes we're not used to thinking of that as part of our stress response, but it absolutely is. Our first instinct in dealing with stress is, can I reach out and find someone to help me? Can I talk it through? Can I, what can I do relationally to mediate the stress? So that's like the top of the ladder. When or if that's inaccessible to us, there's nobody to help for whatever reason, we try to reach out, we're rebuffed or whatever, we descend down the ladder into fight or flight. And that's what we most commonly associate with as our stress response. So fight or flight is I'm going to fight back. I'm going to run away. Right. And I've got to mobilize a lot of internal energy and resource to do that, to take those actions. That's most people, when they're coming in and they're presenting with symptoms of panic, anxiety, or a whole range of, just disorders and dysfunction, like something's not connecting. It's not so much about fight or flight. It's really rooted in a disruption in fight or flight, an inability to complete
the fight or flight cycle. There's nothing wrong with fight or flight. So I think sometimes it gets demonized, right? It's a very necessary part of our physiology.
Right.
But what happens is, for one reason or another, our ability to complete that instinct to protect ourselves, to fight back, or to run away is interrupted. And then that energy stays stuck in our nervous system. And it's held indefinitely. There's no time-bound mechanism by which that energy dissipates. We need to go back and release it, renegotiate it, complete it, right? And so what happens when we are carrying this really high level of activation, could be from a acute stressor, acute trauma, or a chronic stressor, a chronic trauma, over time, it's not sustainable for our nervous system to be in that state of activation. And so we adapt by moving further down the ladder into states of freeze and then collapse, or dissociation. And it's just a way of protecting ourselves internally from those intolerable feelings of chronic activation. So when we're in that state of freeze or collapse, that's where we end up finding, like, I need to relax, but I can't relax. Relaxing makes me nervous. I want to do all these things, but if I try to sit and deep breathe, all those stuck feelings come up and I don't know how to renegotiate them. And so that really is the art and the science. And it's something, that is what we take, that's the program that we guide practitioners through over several months, is how do you, first of all, understand your own internal environment, gain both a cognitive and an intuitive understanding of your client's internal environment, communicate to them, give them the frameworks and the vocabulary to assess where they're at, and then take this suite of tools. Okay, here's, this body of tools that can potentially help with vagal tone, can potentially help with CO2. And let's find what's a match for your nervous system. So, I think for me, a big part of my message to people is like, it's not just a check the box, one size fits all. It's really about befriending the nervous system and understanding we don't have to sit there and throw spaghetti at a wall. Like, there are clear principles and frameworks to figure out what works and what doesn't work. But it's really about partnering with, respecting our nervous system and where it's at, and meeting it where it's at.
From unsolved mysteries to unexplained phenomena, from comedy gold to relationship fails, Amazon Music's got the most ad-free top podcasts, included with Prime. Because the only thing that should interrupt your listening is, well, nothing. Download the Amazon Music app today.
Progressive knows we all crave validation.
Girl, you are not 37.
I would have guessed 27.
You guys are too sweet.
Sure, dewy skin.
Terrific.
Is something wrong, Ned?
Why would you ask? Just because today marks my 10th anniversary without a car accident or even a speeding ticket? But somehow, tonight's all about your skincare.
Wow.
With Snapshot from Progressive, you can get a personalized rate based on how you drive. And that's all the validation you need. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Snapshot not available in California or from all agents. Surcharge possible for unsafe driving.
Right. Can you give just a few examples maybe of the specifics around, just say, for example, the CO2 capacity?
Yeah.
What would be some of the interventions there?
Yeah. So building CO2 capacity is really about gradually, softening our breath and gradually lessening the oxygen that we're taking in relative to the CO2. So a lot of times we think of, okay, I need, to relax, I need a big, long, deep breath. But actually what we're doing in building CO2 tolerance is we're allowing we're not forcefully exhaling as much, and we're allowing the CO2 to gradually build up in our brain. So, or in our bloodstream. So, for example, there's a breath hold that somebody could do, where you're just, you're breathing softly and then intermittently, gently pinching your nostrils. We're just blocking the air passage. There's another breathing exercise around, I call it feather breathing, where you're breathing, nasal breathing so gently that, you imagine my finger's a feather, and I'm going to try to breathe so gently that I don't disturb the feather. Right. And so what that's doing is we're offloading less CO2. It's slowly starting to build up. And if we have a low tolerance, we're going to start, just that very simple breathing exercise is likely going to start to feel agitating very quickly.
Yeah.
So that's when just an understanding of the window of tolerance is really important, because it'll feel counterintuitive. It'll feel like, and clients need a way of kind of giving some context to that internal experience. And just understanding it's totally, we can break this down as much as we want. We can go as slow as we want. Just understand that feeling is not, it's not dangerous. It's just coming up against the limits of your capacity. And as we build your brain's tolerance for CO2, you're going to gradually that's going to be easier and easier. And then what's also going to happen is you're going to notice in your day-to-day life, stressors are more tolerable. Everyday stressors are more tolerable. And when they can start to kind of put the dots together and you have those light bulb moments, that, is really kind of the glue that makes people come back to exercises that would otherwise be, kind of boring or hard to remember, or feel like, it feels agitating. So it doesn't feel like, oh, yay, I want to sit down and do this. But a lot of what we work with is just that, also the science of habit formation. How do you make something? How do you, help somebody really weave something into their day? That was a long answer to your question, but
it's just fascinating to me. And I was curious too, how, I think most of the listeners will be familiar with other somatic approaches, brain spotting or EMDR, those kinds of things. How does this approach kind of integrate with that, or that sort of thing?
Yeah, I love that question. So the way I always introduce this whole framework is, think of it as a scaffolding. It's not going to replace any modality that you currently use. It's just going to make everything you do easier.
Right.
Because every intervention is happening on the foundation of your client's nervous system. We're intervening with the hope to make a change. But that change is always going to happen exponentially, quicker or more easily if there's a foundation of somatic awareness and regulation. So for example, with, I think EMDR is a really great example. EMDR is about basically, it's a methodology for finding and really targeting those stuck energetic charges in the nervous system and processing them.
Right.
And it can be, almost miraculous for a lot of people, because it really is, you're speaking the language of the nervous system, and you are really going in and just supporting the nervous system in what it's already built to do. And so I think that was part of Francine Shapiro's real insight, right? She just started processing stuff, and she wasn't even cognitively aware of what was going on, but she had the wherewithal to just follow that and be curious about it and kind of find out where it led. So I think that's my interpretation of why it can work so well, but it doesn't always work. Sometimes there's, it's either just not accessible, or there's a possibility of a real backlash, a real instability, creating an instability in somebody's system. And when it doesn't work, it's always because you haven't quite met the nervous system where it's at. This is a tool that the nervous system understands, but this is too much too fast. The container isn't there. The foundation isn't there. And so really, when we're talking about nervous system capacity, another word for that would be a container. We're building the container. And when you build a robust container, so much more becomes possible with whatever modality you're using.
Right, right. Oh gosh, this is so fascinating. Yeah. And so I know one of the things that you mentioned, Caitlin, is that you've got a book that you've got out. You want to say more about that?
Yeah, thank you. I'd love to. So, yeah, a couple of months ago, I just really felt inspired to get this down in, really a complete way, because there's a lot of concepts packed in here. There's also a lot of misconceptions and myths, or just misunderstandings in this area. And so I was having so many conversations with practitioners seeking help, and just in the process of kind of explaining what it is that we do, I really got a download of like how much need there is, and also how much lack of understanding and lack of education there really is around some of the fundamentals here. So I put what I call like a primer together called Rebuilding the Nervous System After Trauma. And we really start with, and in a lot of what we've been talking about, kind of catching up on where the conversation, how the conversation has evolved around an understanding of the role of the nervous system in mental health treatment. Doing a little bit of a survey of some of the primary frameworks, concepts that we've inherited and what's still missing there. And really introducing this concept of nervous system capacity as to fill that gap, and to really explain the question of, when something that should be connecting or working isn't connecting, isn't working, isn't accessible, why not? And it always comes down to nervous system capacity. So that book is, it's really an invitation to therapists to orient in a slightly different way towards their practice and towards their clients in general, to really elicit agency from clients. And then it's also, it's a history of just a brief, I don't want to make it seem, I don't want to make it seem like a big intimidating book. It's a brief survey of some of the main concepts, how we got where we are, what's missing. And then we just really dive into the nuts and bolts of like, here's how to do it. And I will caveat that to say, it's an introduction. There really is a whole art and science to this. And so that's the substance of the work that I do, with practitioners one-on-one, is
right.
Really getting into the nuance of it.
Right, right. So I'm assuming you've got some training programs or some ways in which people can get trained in all of this?
Yeah, so I run Foundations of Resilience is the 3-month program that I run with practitioners. And, that's something I've been doing. Really, it came out of, initially I was working one-on-one with individuals with panic and anxiety, and still do today, but really reached a point where I just realized I'm only one person.
Right.
There's a lot of people dealing with anxiety. And the other thing I think that really prompted me was a lot of people that were coming to me had tried therapy and they were burnt out on therapy. And, I've been I have a deep respect for the practice of therapy. I continue to work with, trauma therapists in my own personal life. But I had to really educate myself. I had to go out, and I was in a position to do that, to really find, to understand for myself what the modalities are, what the training is, what I need. So I could really advocate for myself. And I found so many people were coming to me, they hadn't been equipped by the culture at large to really understand what therapy is for, how to engage with therapy, how to find a therapist that can work with you, with what you need. And so they just sort of had this I was told to go to therapy. I went to therapy. It didn't work, or it made it worse. And now I'm just totally freaked out because I think I'm totally broken. And I'm working with these people one-on-one, but I was like, oh my gosh, I really, I just felt this really strong motivation to offer a framework to therapists that they could then offer to their clients to just overall increase the level of understanding of what we're doing here. What are our goals? How do we know if an intervention is accessible? If it doesn't work, how do we troubleshoot it? How do we have a common vocabulary about the foundation we're building? And then if something isn't connecting, we can identify, oh, you need this thing. And that's not what I do, but I can make a referral, but here's what we did together. Right. And, or just being able to really call in the people that need the particular part of the foundation, that a particular practitioner does. So, all that is to say, just over the last couple of years, I really moved into more and more working one-on-one with practitioners, and it's been a real joy.
Awesome.
To do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Caitlin, I've got to be respectful of your time and just all of this, but tell folks where they can reach out to you and website and all of that sort of thing.
Yeah. So you can find a free copy of the book on my website, buildresilience360.com/heal trauma. So that'll send you to a free copy of the book. And then you can go from there to just find out more about me on my website. I've got, a lot of ways of connecting. So I really look forward to hearing from you. And I'd love to hear your feedback on the book. It's always, I feel like a dialogue. It's an ongoing dialogue.
Right. And we'll have links in the show notes and the show summary for people to access that easily. And Caitlin, I hope that we can talk again here soon. This has just been absolutely fascinating. And I'm just full of questions now just about all of this because it is fascinating. So,
thank you.
So we'll be in touch about maybe getting you back on and doing a part 2 of this whole conversation.
Yeah, I'd love that. Thank you so much. For your curiosity and enthusiasm for this topic and for creating this format. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks. Well, thanks. And thanks, everyone. And be sure and check out Caitlin's things in the show notes and the show summary to find those links. So thanks again, Caitlin. Well, big thanks to Caitlin for joining me on the podcast. And be sure and check out her book. And you'll find links here in the show notes and the show summary to get to that. To me, this was just a fascinating conversation of just thinking about how much our somatic system, just our nervous system, our neurobiology, or whatever you want to call it, is involved in just treating trauma and just thinking about trauma. And whether it's our own trauma or those clients that we're working with. And I think Caitlin's doing some groundbreaking work, at least in my mind, of really thinking about things differently just based on her own life experiences and that sort of thing. So be sure and check her things out. Her website is buildresilience360.com. And again, there'll be links here in the show notes and the show summary for that. So again, thanks to Caitlin for joining me, and hopefully you learned a lot from this episode. Also, big thanks to our sponsor of the podcast, TherapyNotes. They are the leading electronic health record system for mental health providers. They're who I use in my practice, and can't say nothing but good about them. They have just been so helpful over the years that I've used them, and the whole clinical side of my practice is centered around the TherapyNotes platform in terms of creating progress notes, treatment plans, all of that sort of thing, appointments, filing insurance claims, taking payments. All of those things are housed right there in TherapyNotes. And now they've got the capacity to use AI in creating our session notes. And it has been just a total game changer. So be sure and check it out, practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes. And use that promo code Gordon, just GORDON, and you can try them out for 2 months for free. I think you'll be pleased with it. So be sure and check it out. And also, we've got, as I mentioned at the beginning, got our 400th episode coming up here soon. I think we're just 2 away with this particular episode coming out. And so looking forward to a little bit a newer look and a few revamps on things with the podcast. So stay tuned for that. And be sure and subscribe and follow us wherever you might be listening to the podcast. So take care, folks, and look forward to being with you here in these future episodes. You've been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, part of the PsychCraft network of podcasts. You can find out more about the other great podcasts in the network by visiting psychcraftnetwork.com. And if you haven't done so already, please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com and get your free private practice startup guide, along with a lot of other great resources and webinars and free things just by visiting. Also, be sure to follow us wherever you might be listening to your podcasts. This podcast is intended to be educational in purpose and is not intended to give legal, accounting, or counseling advice. If you need a professional, find the right person for that.
Marketing is hard. But I'll tell you a little secret. It doesn't have to be. Let me point something out. You're listening to a podcast right now, and it's great. You love the host. You seek it out and download it. You listen to it while driving, working out, cooking, even going to the bathroom. Podcasts are a pretty close companion. And this is a podcast ad. Did I get your attention? You can reach great listeners like yourself with podcast advertising from Libsyn Ads. Choose from hundreds of top podcasts offering host endorsements, or run a pre-produced ad like this one across thousands of shows to reach your target audience in their favorite podcasts with Libsyn Ads. Go to libsynads.com, that's Libsyn, ads.com today,